Okay, welcome to all of you today. Let me debrief you on our today's meeting, the last one under the Hellenic presidency. At the breakfast meeting, we were debriefed on yesterday's Eurogroup and on the economic situation. As regards the ECOFIN meeting, I would like to highlight the political agreement reached by the Council on the Commission's proposal to amend the Parent Subsidiaries Directive. While the directive's purpose was designed to avoid companies from suffering from double taxation on the single market, there are cases, and we all know them, where it is being abused by companies to avoid paying taxes in any member state. Today's agreement counters double non-taxation of corporate groups deriving from hybrid loan arrangements. This agreement allows for closing the hybrid loan mismatch, that's how it's called, various loopholes which generate important losses of revenues to our countries. Thus, we're making a tangible step forward in the fight against tax avoidance. Also, and this is also in response to the request that was made by the European Council back in December of 2013. Moreover, today the Commission presented to the Council the draft agenda budget for 2015. Under the Council's Rules of Procedure, Article 19, this item was chaired by the incoming Italian presidency. They will have to deal with the details next semester. Furthermore, as part of the European Semester 2014 process, we have also discussed country-specific recommendations on member states on economic and fiscal policies. We approved recommendations to 26 member states and a specific recommendation on the economic policies of the member states of the euro area. The Council, on the basis of the Commission's proposal, adopted a recommendation that will enable Lithuania to become the 19th member of the euro area as of January 1st, 2015. This was a very interesting moment today, the Lithuanian acceptance. According to the Commission's assessment, the country has achieved a high degree of sustainable convergence and fulfills all the necessary conditions for adopting the euro as its currency. Both the country-specific recommendations and the recommendation on Lithuania adopting the euro will be referred to the European Council on June 26-27 before the final decisions are taken. Additionally, the Council, in the framework of the implementation of the Stability and Growth Pact, has agreed on the abrogation of excessive deficit procedure for Belgium, the Czech Republic, Denmark, the Netherlands, Austria, and Slovakia. It also endorsed terms of reference on the review of the methodology for the assessment of member states' effective action in the context of the EDP. Finally, the Commission has briefed the Council on the state of play of implementing legislation concerning bank contributions to resolution funds under the recently agreed bank resolution rules. As the Presidency concludes, today, you know, it was the last ECOFIN under the Hellenic Presidency, and I mentioned this, let me take the opportunity to say a few words about the results of our presidency. It has been a demanding exercise for Greece, considering the tight time frame in the run-up to the European elections in May. Nevertheless, we have managed to reach an agreement on a number of important files, as well as to make considerable progress on many others. The Presidency has put strong emphasis on the revision of the regulatory framework for the operation of the supervision of the financial sector, in order to strengthen confidence and increase liquidity in the European economy. During the first quarter of our presidency, we made banking union a key priority, and we managed to reach an agreement acceptable by all parties on the most difficult file of the banking union, which is the single resolution mechanism. I'd like to remind you that wherever money is involved, it gets tough, and single resolution mechanism means money, so it is tough. The regulation, together with the Single Resolution Fund, substantially completes the building up of the banking union. The completion is not over yet. It's a process, but this was a major step. So this sort of constitutes one of the most challenging goals of the economic and financial integration. I just want to make an extra comment on myself. What we're trying to do in Europe today is to create a banking union without a fiscal union. The Americans have a banking union, and it was established back in the 1930s, but they already had a fiscal union of their member states. We are trying to do something very difficult, to do a banking union without having a huge central budget, without necessarily having a fiscal union, and having to reach a consensus. This is a tough job. I think we made progress during this semester. During the second quarter of the presidency, we put emphasis on the progress of pending tax legislation, as it is highly important to take appropriate action at European level against taxation practices that undermine citizens' and investors' confidence and encourage tax avoidance, tax evasion. The effective management of the fourth European semester cycle has also been a priority throughout this period. I take this opportunity to thank all those who assisted the Hellenic presidency in its important tasks, and I would like to wish our successor, the Italian presidency, the very best in its work at this critical time in the Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Gikas. Dear friends, I will make 3 points, and I can be rather brief. First, I want to welcome the Council's decision today to close the excessive deficit procedure for a further 6 countries, namely Austria, Belgium, the Czech Republic, Denmark, the Netherlands, and Slovakia. This brings the total number of countries still in the corrective arm of the Stability and Growth Pact down to 11 from 24 member states 3 years ago. So 3 years ago we had 24 out of 27 member states in the EDP. Today 11 out of 28. In other words, our reformed fiscal rules are working and delivering more sustainable public finances in Europe. The second piece of good news today is the Council decision to recommend to heads of state and government that they endorse Lithuania's accession to the euro next January. This is another important step towards having a Baltic full house in the euro area, which I'm confident is now at hand and will be very good news for Lithuanian citizens and for the euro area as a whole. And third, I welcome today's endorsement by the Council, by the ECOFIN Council, of the country-specific recommendations which the Commission put forward on the 2nd of June. These recommendations together form a blueprint for reinforcing the recovery in growth and employment that is now underway in Europe, but which remains still fragile. The recommendations that will now go to EU leaders to be discussed at next week's European Council contain, in fact, very, very few substantive changes compared to the Commission's original proposals. The current very benign market conditions are of course welcome after the turbulence of recent years, but they should not be taken as an excuse to reduce the momentum of economic reforms for growth and employment, because that would go against the interests of European citizens. It's very important that we use the European semester in this context as an instrument to have a political drive for economic reforms and thus strengthen the economic recovery and the basics of employment. Let me conclude by thanking the Greek presidency, both Gigas and your predecessor Yanis Stournaras and the whole team of the Greek presidency, on behalf of the Commission, for the very good cooperation over these past 6 months in the ECOFIN Council and elsewhere. This is also my last ECOFIN Council after 4.5 years representing the Commission in this role. The European economy has come a long way through a very deep crisis, which continues to cast a long shadow over our societies. Nonetheless, I believe we are today in a good position to build on what we have achieved together and to deliver a stronger and lasting recovery in growth and employment, provided that there is no complacency, but instead we stay the course of economic reform. So thank you very much to all of you. I will miss you guys. Thank you. Please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our campaign against corporate tax avoidance marches on with further important advances today. I am delighted that finance ministers have agreed on a crucial revision to the Parent Subsidiary Directive, which will block a prevalent form of aggressive tax planning known as hybrid loan arrangements. No longer will companies be able to exploit this loophole in our legislation to minimize their tax bills. That is good news for public budgets, good news for honest businesses, and good news for those who seek fair taxation in the EU. Over the past months, we have been able to assuage particular concerns that 2 member states, Sweden and Malta, had on this issue. As a result, all 28 member states could give their full backing to this proposal today, thereby tightening our common rules in a way which will benefit them all. Following my meeting this morning with Italian Finance Minister, I have every confidence that the upcoming Italian presidency will be able to secure agreement on the general anti-abuse rule, which is the other amendment we have proposed to this directive. With these divisions, the Parent Subsidiary Directive will remain an important tool in creating a business-friendly environment in the EU without giving unintended opportunities to tax avoiders. In a similar way, I also welcome the Council's green light for the Commission to start a broad assessment of all patent boxes in the EU. Member States' tax incentives should never be used to lure profits away from where they should rightfully be taxed. We must verify that the principles of fair play are not being undermined. However, we will begin our assessment immediately and expand it further as Member States clarify the criteria for certain elements. I remain hopeful that a full evaluation will be delivered to finance ministers by the end of this year, as they requested last December. Last but certainly not least, our 2-year dialogue with Switzerland on corporate taxation has formally been closed today with successful results. Switzerland has agreed to remove a number of harmful tax regimes that were of concern to member states. Our efforts to secure fair tax competition are bearing fruit even beyond EU borders. I must commend everyone involved in these discussions for the great outcome, and the Member States themselves for the support they lent this process. Our work now continues through our participation in the OECD BEPS project to clamp down on tax avoidance. Our sights are set on tackling unfair tax practices worldwide. If we continue to work as a union, with ambition and determination, I have great hopes that this can be achieved. And as Lithuanian, I particularly welcome today's decision of the ECOFIN to invite Lithuania to join Eurozone, and I think that all Lithuanians, they could be very proud about this achievement. And finally, I would like to thank Greek Presidency for their excellent job in taxation field. I think that they did a lot during this six months in order to have a very important progress in taxation field, which, as you know, is not an easy task.
Yes, hi, Petra Miklot, Slovenian Press Agency. It's a question for Commissioner Rehn on Slovenian CSRs. Slovenia is not happy with the deadlines you put in the recommendations regarding specific banks' privatization. I would like to know, why did you insist on keeping them? And second, what's the final result if the recommendations adopted today are the same as as were proposed by you, or are there any differences? And thirdly, if you could please comment on the special declaration that Slovenia submitted. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very important that Slovenia continues the efforts of economic reform which have been going on in the recent period, and the restructuring and privatization of parts of the banking sector is an essential element of this overall reform process. The timeline for the privatization of one of the banks in ECOFIN is already committed by Slovenia. It's publicly known and anticipated by the markets, and there is no reason to doubt that the process would be completed in 2014 in the course of this year, or that there's no reason to doubt that recalling this date could adversely affect the price and the return for the Slovenian taxpayers. So there is no contradiction between the timelines in the country-specific recommendations and the state aid decisions. The state aid decision for ECOFIN sets an ultimate deadline for privatization by the end of 2016. Failing to privatize the bank by this date would result in a forced sale by a trustee at no minimum price. So in order to avoid such a disruptive scenario, Slovenia needs to initiate and advance the privatization process at a much earlier stage. This is the background and logic of this recommendation, and I trust that Slovenia will now follow this recommendation, which was endorsed by the ECOFIN Council.
Simon Marks from Market News International. It's another question for Commissioner Rehn. On France, there's been some doubts raised recently on its ability to reduce the budget deficit and hit the 3.9% for 2014. And the Cour des Comptes, the national auditor, raised doubt on this as well this week, saying it could go above 4% if there's not 1% GDP growth. I was just wondering, what is your take on this? Do you think France is on track to meet its targets? And you know, is France doing enough to reduce its spending in order to meet its budget deficit? Thanks.
Thanks. You may recall that in spring, in March, April, we raised the concern about the path of fiscal policy in France. And since then we have had dialogue with the French authorities and the French government has taken certain decisions and we will in due course assess whether this amounts to effective action, and I assume it can be done immediately after the summer break, so that once we have the economic forecasts in the fall and we will take the next have the next checkpoint in fiscal policy, we can then provide our views. But essentially we have from the Commission provided an early warning to France that their fiscal path may deviate from the Stability and Growth Pact, and according to the Treaty and Pact it is always the responsibility of the Member State concerned to take the necessary action and ensure that the country respects its commitments under the Stability and Growth Pact. So I trust that France will further intensify its efforts not only in the field of fiscal consolidation but in the field of structural reforms and supporting investment, because what France needs at this juncture is stronger emphasis on competitiveness, growth and employment while maintaining sound public finances.
Juan Sander Melando from the Spanish news agency Europa Press. My question is for Vice President Rehn. I would like to know what's your preliminary reaction to the tax reform approved just today by Spain. Do you think it's compatible with the country-specific recommendations that were approved by the ECOFIN? And in particular, is the reduction of taxes included in this reform compatible with the deficit objectives for Spain? Thank you.
Thank you. We were broadly aware of the plans by the Spanish government to take further action in the field of taxation and tax reform, but I cannot say that we would have intensively been consulted. This means that we will now study the decisions and assess their compatibility with the country-specific recommendations. Once we have done our assessment, I mean, these decisions were taken today. So once we have done our assessment, we will inform you about that, and we will, in that context, obviously see whether these decisions are in line with the Council recommendations adopted today.
Alejandro Mato for the Spanish Media Capital Radio. We have just heard that from the Spanish Finance Minister, Luis de Guindos, that this fiscal reform is going to go in line with the recommendations of the European Commission, and also is going to fulfill all the fiscal requirements that are necessary for this year or for the next years. I guess, or I think that this is a little contrary about what you have just said.
I don't want to comment the remarks of my good friend Luis de Guindos of Atletico Madrid in any context if I haven't seen them first. So I just say that I hope this is the case, that they are in line, the decisions are in line with the country-specific recommendations. But the Commission works so that we always first analyze and verify before we make any comments on such issues of such major importance to the economy of Spain and economic policy coordination of the Eurozone.
Hello, Miquel Roig from a Spanish newspaper, Expansión. When you say that you cannot say that you have been intensely consulted by the Spanish government about that, does that mean that you would have been more happy to be more consulted on this issue by the Spanish government? Thank you.
No, it does not mean necessarily that. What is essential is that these decisions are in line with the Council recommendations. In case they are in line with the Council recommendations without intensive consultation with the Commission, all the better.
Yes, Eliseo Oliveras from the Spanish newspaper El Periódico. This question is for Mr. Semeta, Commissaire. It's about the change you have agreed, the Council has agreed today in the subsidiary directive. When will be effective this change to close this hole that the big companies using? Which year the big companies will be not able anymore to use this thing to not pay taxes? Thank you.
Directive will enter into force immediately after its publication in the official journal, 20 days after its publication in official journal. But since it's the directive, it has to be transposed into national legislation of the member states, and directive foresees that member states have to do it during the course of 2015 in order to have it fully functional from the 1st of January 2016.
Thank you. Peter Spiegel with the Financial Times. Question for Mr. Harduvis, if I pronounced that correctly. Welcome. I wonder if you could just bring us up to date on where you are with meeting program benchmarks. Mr. Rehn yesterday expressed some concern that the pace of reform is slowing, and Mr. Dijsselbloem said your May benchmarks will be met at the end of June. And also, it's just if you bring us up to date on that, when you actually think you're going to complete the 6 and 6 benchmarks that are needed. And also when you like to start the discussion on debt relief. Again, Mr. Dijsselbloem yesterday suggested that perhaps it might not even be necessary to have that discussion. Did you discuss that with Mr. Dijsselbloem yesterday? And can you bring us up to date on that? Thank you.
Well, the reason the May benchmarks, or there's a buzzword for it, milestones, they delayed is obvious. We had the European Parliament elections. Everybody was busy with that. But before I left office, I made sure I knew exactly the state of play on those first 6 milestones. And I'm pretty confident that by the end of June, and I said this at the Eurogroup meeting, we will have satisfied them. The next set of milestones, another 6, they're so-called June milestones. Most likely they will be over before people go on vacation in August. So we kind of want them so we can draw the funding that was promised, about 2 billion, plus the S&P profits. So it's critical for us. What I can say is that the Greek government has every incentive to be very quick and very fast in delivering the promised reforms. Now, regarding your second question about the debt negotiation, this is something that's in the air. I mean, there's no specific deadline. When we think it's necessary, we'll start it. But it's not, right now for us, as a Greek government, what matters is essentially doing what we have to do now. Funding is more or less guaranteed both by the IMF, and there's some ifs and buts with the European funding, which is conditioned on the benchmarks. So what we really want to do is continue and make sure we do the structural reforms. I heard the word structural reforms many, many times today. I realize they are not only the buzzword for Greece, but for every other member state. And in fact, Greece is way ahead of the group, perhaps because of the incentive it has to do them. But it's true, we need to make sure that the Greek population realizes that their reforms are there for their benefit, and they slowly take ownership of the reforms. They have seen drug prices coming down. They can see their taxes, and they can file their taxes on the internet. They can go shopping right after their work their life slowly changes for the better. It's not an easy task. It's a big struggle, you know, reforms, you have to initiate them, but then you have to keep on doing them and making sure they're not being taken back by special interest groups. The Greek population has matured, you know, it went through 6 years of rough times. Every family is feeling this crisis. But one thing, you know, they may have unemployed people in the family, they may have kids that cannot find work, their salary may be delayed for 6 months if they work for a company that has a tough time to pay their employees. Everybody is affected. But one thing is sure, everybody now realizes that there is no free lunch. I think only economists used to understand that in the past. Now they understand that you cannot get something from the government unless somebody pays for it, because they have connected taxing and spending. So they demand from their leaders to balance their budgets, and they demand whatever we promise, we back it up by financing. So I think Greece is going through a new era, a mature population that's facing itself, facing its problems, willing to solve those problems.
I see no other questions. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Proposal to amend the Parent Subsidiaries Directive. There are cases, and we all know them, where it is the country has achieved a high degree of sustainable convergence and fulfills all the necessary conditions for adopting. Additionally, the Council, in the framework of the implementation of the Stability and Growth Pact, has agreed with Austria and Slovakia. It also endorsed terms of reference on the river yet. It's a process, but this was a major step. So this sort of constitutes one of the most challenging